Meet Aaron Meadows. In his hometown of Mobile, Alabama, he's better known as Champagne Monroe, his drag queen alter ego. And I owe Champagne a debt of gratitude for helping me on my journey this academic year. That journey of exploration and discovery has involved serious questioning and considerable rethinking around questions of identity. But don't worry, I'm not about to get uncomfortably personal. I'm talking about corporate identity. And wrestling with questions of identity is one of the most important things you can do as an organizational leader. I came to Stanford to study metrics around consumer attachment to news brands. And that question makes me a bit of an outlier among JSK Fellows here and among journalists in general. When I talk about news brands to journalists, I mostly get quizzical looks. Corporate branding is not something they tend to think about much. In fact, if there's anything a journalist distrusts more than a politician, it's a marketer. And that might help explain the industry's current predicament. But the savvy journalist or business person might indeed ask whether news brands even matter anymore. Haven't Facebook and Google rendered them obsolete, irrelevant? It's a good question, and one that I found myself asking repeatedly as I delved into my question. After all, part of what has fueled the rise of fake news is the fact that so many people do not pay attention to the sources of the news stories they share. Maybe asking who produced a story is becoming like asking who grew the corn on my plate. Maybe news is just another commodity with no meaningful brand identity to differentiate between various stories and their producers. Thanks, Facebook. But then Champagne's story reminded me of the true power of identity when Michelle Holmes shared it with JSK Fellows last fall. Michelle is Vice President of Content at Alabama Media Group, and she came to Stanford to talk about the work she's doing there. 5 years ago, she arrived to an organization that many had written off. Its newspapers had just gone from printing 7 days a week to printing just 3. Newsroom morale was decimated, and readers were up in arms. Today, Alabama Media Group is a case study in organizational transformation, one that should stand alongside the GSB and Harvard Business School cases you read in this place. Even before columnist John Archibald brought home the Pulitzer Prize in April, the group was a rare bright spot in local and regional news, sustainably producing innovative and important work. Michelle summed up Alabama Media Group's transformation by explaining that they focused on building brands that people love. In short, people should want to wear the t-shirt. And her talk took me back to the foundations of brand and corporate identity, back to my time consulting Fortune 500 companies in developing digital brands, back to my time as a magazine publisher, bootstrapping a niche music magazine to build it into the 3rd largest in the US and Great Britain, and back to my own MBA and what has been my Bible of organizational development and strategy, Good to Great, the classic from former GSB professor Jim Collins. Collins developed this Venn diagram as a tool to help a company hone its identity. To do so, look to your passion, to what you can be the best in the world at, and to what drives your economic engine. This question of corporate identity is much deeper and more powerful than a simple marketing slogan. This isn't about brand as a mere positioning statement. It's about answering the fundamental question of who and what you are as an organization. And it's devilishly difficult to answer. In an episode of Reid Hoffman's Masters of Scale podcast from earlier this year, the LinkedIn founder and venture capitalist challenged leaders in Silicon Valley to build companies that last. To do that, he said, business leaders must answer that fundamental question of identity. What are we? The difficulty and challenge in rigorously answering that question explains why, in his words, very few companies have managed to both scale tremendously and age gracefully. In other words, understanding your identity is a primary determinant of how big you will grow and how long you will last. News organizations, after thriving for well over a century in some cases, are certainly struggling to age gracefully. But the fact of the matter is, a number of national brands are figuring this out. When I say the New York Times, the Washington Post, ProPublica, NPR, or The Economist, I'd venture that every one of you has some sense of the identities of these brands, what they are about. But what about the San Jose Mercury News, the San Francisco Chronicle, the news team at KGO-TV, or whatever local news organizations you're familiar with in your hometown? I bet that whatever comes to mind, it is much more muddled. Alabama Media Group, however, is figuring this out at the local level. They use quality storytelling that makes Alabama a better place, their passion, to clearly define audiences in Alabama, what they can be the best at, and deliver them to advertisers with well-defined target audiences of their own, their economic engine. So, for example, they created the Facebook native brand Reckon for hard news around issues of importance to Alabamians. That separate identity has kept discussions civil and serious, in part because what you don't get are fans of Alabama football getting drawn into flame wars by political coverage they just happen to stumble upon. For those sports fans, they've created SEC shorts. And for those just wanting a laugh, It's a Southern Thing gets BuzzFeed-level traffic and engagement that would make any brand envious. These and a dozen or so other brands have attracted new audiences and, importantly for their business model, advertisers that would never advertise on a traditional news site. Finally, there's People of Alabama, the Humans of New York style project that featured Champaign Monroe. Had Alabama Media Group not been clear on its own identity, it would have simply placed this profile as a human interest story on its main AL.com site, and then it would have cowered at the vitriol unleashed on this African-American drag queen from coastal Alabama. As comment threads on news sites are notorious for that lack of civility, and I know this well. A few years ago, my wife wrote this column for our local paper about sharing food traditions with friends in our new hometown. It was a sweet, anodyne column that talked about her Persian heritage. And some of the comments were just mindless and hurtful. Comments along the lines of, "Why do we care what towelheads have for dinner?" But in Champaign's case, Alabama Media Group had built a community of people invested in the people, stories, and diversity of Alabama. That community responded with comments like, "You're an inspiration," and "Yes, Queen." One person, one out of hundreds, left a disparaging comment, and that community quickly showed that person to the door. And that is the power of identity. Thank you.